My name is Melissa Ziobro, and I am the Specialist Professor of Public History at Monmouth University in West Long Branch, New Jersey. Today is October 18th, 2021. We are here today with John Comiskey for an interview to augment the exhibit Monmouth County 9/11 and its Aftermath. This interview is being recorded with the permission of all participants. John, can you just confirm for me that you do indeed consent to the recording and that you understand that this interview will live in the public domain?
I consent to the recording, and I'm aware that this will live on in the website or the legacy.
Okay, thank you so much. So can you start by just telling us a little bit about your early life? You know, where and when were you born and raised?
So I'm a real New Yorker, born and raised in Queens, New York, and attended grammar school there and went to high school in Manhattan, and went on to my undergrad degree in Queens College. So I'm a real Queens guy. I lived in Queens until earlier this year. So for the last quite many years in Queens, New York. So went on, and I was what we call it a failed accountant in undergrad. I thought I was going to be in business and accountant, and I did that for 3 semesters, and I just really didn't like it. I could handle the worksheets and the 12-column stuff. Found it really just wasn't me. And 3 of my very closest friends all became police officers, and just talking to them, it was like they were going to I don't know, a mission or a purpose. They just loved their work and took the exam and went on and wasn't sure if I was going to stay in policing, and went on, and I ended up kind of really almost right away realizing, wow, I can do this, and it is interesting. I'm not really one much for being behind the desk, and it really, one thing of maybe not known well is that there's really a tremendous amount of both vertical and horizontal opportunities in policing, whether it's aviation or maritime or investigatory, and then certainly supervisory and I think even event management, which I, in my latter years, got on very much an incident commander with the U.S. Open and Shea Stadium and the UN General Assembly. So there's a tremendous amount of career trajectories and opportunities there, which was, I think, one of the things that I really did like in my 25 years there. Was involved in maybe about 6 or 7 major units.
It's funny, I always tell our students at Monmouth, it's okay to change your mind. Just because you picked something at 18 years old doesn't mean you're stuck with it. And it sounds like that's what you did yourself.
Yeah, you might find it interesting. I actually chose my end major was history as an undergrad. And I had actually went on to get a master's in secondary ed social studies and was a high school teacher for a short period of time.
Okay, very interesting. So what year did you graduate college, and then after that you went into the police academy?
No, very kind of a mixed experience. I did 1 year full time, and then my parents moved away, and I decided to go to school at night, and I had an opportunity. I worked in a fish market for about 4 years and went to school at night. And I got called for the police department. I had 90 credits. At that time, you didn't need any college to get on a police department. So I took a leave of absence for a semester and went back, and then got called into military service with the Coast Guard. So I had a couple of breaks, a couple of different paths. And the way the reserves work, essentially, for the most part, you do 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. And then unless something blows up, and a couple of times it did blow up, and I went away for 8 months, 9 months at a time, or for the Iraqi war, and then even for Deepwater Horizon, I went away for a couple of months.
Okay, so fascinating. So then what year do you finally start working with the NYPD?
January 87.
January 87. Okay. All right. So talk to me a little bit, just to provide some background about your career trajectory up to September of 2001. You, by September of 2001, are a lieutenant with the NYPD, but just give us a brief sketch of your career and the special units you worked in up until September 2001.
Okay. So really for about my first 7.5 years, I was a patrol officer in the 8-3. And I was always, I missed one window. I guess I had about 1.5 years on. I missed eligibility for the sergeant's exam by 18 days. And that really kind of held me back. I really always felt like I just kind of missed that window. But being a patrol officer in a precinct at that time, there was not as many specialized units, but I did get to do anti-crime, which is street crime, robberies, and a street narcotics enforcement unit. And then, even interestingly enough, a short period of time, I did what's called a peddler squad. It's something called trademark counterfeiting. So some of the people watching this video may, or YouTube or what have you, might realize that one time there were like VHS stuff, and peddlers would sell them. They were counterfeit goods, and they would sell them on the corners. And the motion picture industry was losing a tremendous amount of revenue, and they pressured the city. And I was a senior guy, and they knew I was getting promoted. They said, listen, when you do this for about a year before you get promoted. So I did that, and so I got to really interact with the motion picture industry. Again, it was VHS. Now everything is streamed. So I did that for then I made sergeant, and I worked midnights in a place called Bedford-Stuyvesant, Bed-Stuy, do or die, pretty high level crime area. And even where I was prior to that, for the 8 years, Bushwick, Brooklyn. At that time, the city was doing about 2,200 homicides a year, really high crime there. Now it's down to about 400 a year. So the 8-3 was about 30 square blocks. I'm jumping back a little bit. There were 30 square blocks, 80 homicides a year. So as a young police officer, it wasn't uncommon for me to handle or see one homicide a week. And the narco trafficking was just really like a supermarket experience where you would typically do any kind of narcotics operation and pick up 3, 4, or 5 people with 100 units of heroin. Bushwick was like the heroin capital of the world. But then by 1993, a guy named Bill Bratton came in and introduced a program called CompStat. And we saw really some aggressive policing really reduce that crime. And we went from that maybe 2,200 homicides a year down to what it is now. It actually spiked up a little bit in the last year or two, but maybe 400. So 400 is a really good number compared to 2,200, unless you're one of those 400 people. And obviously, still a pretty crazy number, but for a city of 8 million people, relatively speaking. So I got to see, I mention that because I got to see 2 transitions in the NYPD. One, we went to the pre-CompStat to the post-CompStat, with all the kind of data analysis. And then after 9/11, I saw them take on this large counterterrorism role. But for 4 years, and exactly 4 years to the date, March 31st and March 31st, I was promoted to sergeant and lieutenant. So I was actually, which is unusual, I guess maybe the way the calendar played out, I was a sergeant for 4 years to the day. And for my first year, I was a sergeant in the 8-1 precinct, mostly patrol, and went to anti-crime. And then I was asked to take over a unit called the Criminal Justice Bureau. There's one court section in each borough handling the court. So Brooklyn at the time was handling about 100,000 arrests a year. And I had the night court. My job was really to move, as many as 300 prisoners through the system on a daily basis. So it was a very high volume. You're dealing with the judges, the court officers, corrections, moving those people. I really got to go behind the scenes. And I was there for a couple of big technological changes where we went from ink prints for prisoner processing. My 8 years as a police officer, I never did a digital print. I was all ink. As a sergeant, I was part of a program where we called it live scan, and then even photo imaging. So you had mug shots that were actually taken by a photographer. Now, this may sound ancient, but it was a big deal in 2000. And we went from processing a prisoner average of about 70 hours to get people out of the system to about 21 hours. So I was kind of got behind the scenes. So I got a little window behind that. But those were the only 4 years, or actually maybe about 3 years, where I was off patrol, where I really wasn't on the street, where I really wanted to be. So I made lieutenant, and I was in a precinct called 104 precinct in Glendale, Queens. And it was actually a relatively quiet precinct, what I was used to. But I had an opportunity, actually, just really, I was in the right place at the right time. Typically, the command I got, a platoon commander of a task force, typically went to a senior lieutenant. And it happened, I was in 104, and we had what's called a special category missing. And I initiated what's called a mobilization and brought in additional resources. And the very high-ranking chief was very unhappy with what I did and told me so. And I politely said, well, I've got this missing kid. He says to me, it's my experience. This kid's going to, be found at his friend's house after school. He's playing hooky or what have you. I said, well, I'm trying to find this kid, and his parents aren't going to accept that answer. But we did actually find the kid playing hooky in his parents' house, in his friend's house in East New York. But I stood up to the chief and said, I got a job to do. Unless you tell me otherwise, I'm going to continue on. And really kind of went back at me. Who are you? I'm a lieutenant in the NYPD. If you want to countermand the order, you can do that. It ended up being that he actually liked what I did. That it started out like a little bit of a push-shove thing, but I essentially held my ground, and a position came that so now the captain of that unit was there and saw this encounter. Lo and behold, an opening comes up for that command, and I go for an interview, and I walk into his office, and he goes, "You're the guy that spoke up to Inspector Gunther. I want you. You got the job. Interview's over. You got it." And there was a little, unhappiness with some senior guys that I walked into that position. So I was actually there as a lieutenant for about a year and a half when 9/11 happened. So I was considered almost like a junior lieutenant for time wise. But again, there was a couple of other things why I got it. I was a hazmat technician with the Coast Guard. They did like the riot control stuff. They also started using CBRN masks for like respiratory work, which would end up prove to be quite helpful. Probably saved my lungs on 9/11. Having a helmet and a respirator, which many of my colleagues didn't. So 9/11, I'm a lieutenant. I have about 13 years on in the NYPD, and at that time, I guess I had about the same amount of time as a reservist in the Coast Guard, where I ended up becoming a senior chief. So that's the 101 of my police experience in the 13 years up until 9/11, which is obviously the day of days.
Okay, thank you. It's so helpful to have that background context. So when we get up to the month of September 2001, you live in Queens, you are a relatively newly minted lieutenant. Was that Tuesday, September 11th, supposed to be a regular work day for you?
It was. I actually was scheduled. I was off duty when it happened. I was scheduled to come in at 6 p.m. that evening.
Okay.
I was actually off duty.
Okay. Okay. Now, you ultimately wind up in the thick of things at Ground Zero, but when you first heard that something was happening, were you at home in Queens?
I was, yes. I just dropped my kids off from school, and my wife was a school teacher, so she would come home and I would drop the kids off, and my sister had a young kid at the time, and I was actually going to be picking her up. So my schedule for the day was I was going to pick up my kids as well as my niece and nephew, earlier. That was the plan of the day.
And do you remember how you first heard something was happening? Do you hear through the NYPD chain? Do you just hear it on the news? How do you first hear?
It was a phone call, and the interesting thing was I was studying for a promotional exam. So typically my day was that I would come home and I would turn my phone off and I would study for 3 hours. But I was expecting a phone call. I said, well, I'm going to probably get interrupted today, and it had nothing to do with 9/11. No, that's what I did. But I left my phone on, and I get a phone call, and I put on the news. And I think the first plane had hit. Second one hadn't hit at that time. And it's okay. It's pretty bad. We got a plane crash. I think this is, I guess, a common experience for most people. That's pretty bad. We got a plane crash. I might be getting called in. And then as I'm watching the news live when the second plane hit, and I just got in my car, and my commute time to work is about 10 minutes, if that. So I didn't wait for a call. I went right to work.
Okay. And do you report to your office initially?
I do. So I get there, and there's everybody running around. So my unit at the time is a task force. There's one of 8 in the city. And so they don't have a regular precinct. They essentially, it's literal. They get tasked to maybe 1 or 2 precincts citywide, where it could be mostly like high crime area or special operations, or if anything big happens. So this is obviously something super big. So all of the task forces are going to be going to Ground Zero. So I get to my base when people are starting to form up, and I see my captain, and he's like, great. The day tour lieutenant wasn't in, had the day off, and they couldn't raise him. They couldn't find him. So great, I got a lieutenant coming in with me. And there was another lieutenant there, an administrative lieutenant. So we ended up having like one captain, 2 lieutenants, and about a contingent of 28 people. And at this time, you know, I had been at the 93 World Trade Center bombing, and there was a big thing of there'll be like beds of fire hoses, and people were walking across them, and the hoses would snap. There was a lot of broken ankles. And for whatever reason, I said to everybody, "One, stay together, and don't walk across a bed of fire hoses." If you have to leave us for any short period of time, use the men's room or what have you, tell somebody. Just really stay together. And today is going to be a really bad day. Just know that, and we're going to have to just stay together. We're going to be going in as a team, and keep reminding yourselves of that. And so, again, some of the younger people may not appreciate this. Most people didn't have cell phones then, and many of the towers were actually part of the World Trade Center. So there was very little in the way of cell phone communications at that time.
And how about your radios? Were they reliable throughout the day, or?
Yeah, we didn't, my unit didn't have any issues with the radio other than it just being frantic. You know, normally there's, 5 minutes of silence. It just was complete screaming. And there's certain calls like 1085 or 1013, which are really bad distress. And then we were getting somehow fire calls coming over in the words Mayday, but it would be, 5 or 6 different locations, 1013 at the Holland Tunnel, 1013 here. And it's just constant. We're just really trying to, keep track of it. And but there's another thing we do, like whatever happens, we're going here. We're told to go here unless something pops up right in front of us. So we were going direct to the towers. And this is what I think people should understand. We had every expectation that the towers were going to stand. We did not anticipate a collapse. That was the plan was we were going to evacuate everybody, and the towers would stand. So that was and obviously the response would have been different, particularly to where we actually responded.
Now, when your group musters up, what equipment are you grabbing? What supplies are you grabbing to go with you?
So there was a Sears across the street from us. And I just said, grab everything, shovels and stuff. And we did. I went in, I told the manager, we need this stuff. And he goes, hey, do you mind if we videotape you just so we can get an inventory? I said, yeah, knock yourself out. Great. We're just going to, I told the guys, any kind of helmets. So we had our own helmets, any kind of helmets, any kind of shovels, grab that. That's all we really had. What we did have, which proved very helpful, is we had helmets. They were typically riot helmets, but I got hit with a shard of glass and it just felt like a ping. I didn't know there was, so that saved me from having a nice big boo-boo on my head. And we had real cursory, respirators that certainly wouldn't be, they were, as a matter of fact, they were replaced because they weren't OSHA certified later on, but we did have some form of respiration. So that, and whatever we got, ad hoc shovels, and was about it.
Okay. And how did you convoy there? Were you in walking distance? Did you take your personal vehicles or patrol cars? How do you get to Ground Zero?
So we had, I guess, we had about 6 or 7 vans. Okay. And I was in a car. So it was the captain car ahead of me and the 2 lieutenants, maybe 3 or 4 cars and about 5 or 6 vans. So it was very typical for the task force to have, we had a lot of vans. When we responded, it was typically anything we responded to, we typically responded with like 16 officers. Remember, we're a mobile response force. So this is very typical. We just doubled our numbers that day.
Okay. Can you describe for us what it's like as you approach this scene?
Well, I think it's getting there. We're on the LIE. So first, there's no traffic. So there's like, anybody that's driven to Manhattan understands it. Well, there's no traffic. The roads are cleared. It's just emergency response vehicles. So we're flying. We're doing 80, 90 miles an hour, and the radio is blasting. But on the LIE or going over the Kosciuszko, you can see the towers on fire. I'm like, that's a really bad fire. And just seeing that. And then when we come over, we go under the tunnel, we go through the Midtown Tunnel, and we're on the FDR. You get towards the end, before we make a turn off, you get a visual of the Brooklyn Bridge, and you see thousands of people running over the bridge. So we got a visual of that. And then I forget the street we make a right from the tip of the FDR all the way to the west side. And there's actually this one sergeant, and I know him, and he's just pumping everybody to go. And I come back to him a year or two later. He was missing that day, obviously, he was okay. But I was at a barbecue, and his wife was there, and that came up. And she, for a number of hours, really thought he was dead. And she didn't know that I knew this. And she, at the barbecue, like, punched me a couple of times in the chest. You knew that, and you didn't tell me this? And I'm like, I'm sorry, they were busy. You know, it was, but I remember, like, you know, somebody punching your chest 2 or 3 times, you're like, well, I'm going to take this. And I understand her. And it was a release for her, and we laughed about it a year or two later. But anyway, that was kind of like, you just see things, you know, like the little things like that you laugh at the time, don't seem significant.
Do you recall roughly what time it was when you actually make it to Ground Zero?
So it was, I don't know the exact time, but when we're through the tunnel, the first tower collapsed. We don't know this. So when we get to the base of the 3 blocks north of the towers, we don't know that the first tower is down, other than there's this extremely dark smoke. But now we're starting to get reports that, hey, we think the tower collapsed or part of the tower collapsed. Visibility is really poor. You can't see 5 feet in front of you. And so there's mayhem from that. And then one of the lieutenants in my unit, the other lieutenant, who happened to be a volunteer fireman, he says something like, he says, we're in a collapse zone. And I used an expletive. So you're out of your mind. You know, what are you talking about? And with that, the ground beneath us starts rumbling. I'm like, wow, this is real. So it was real. That part was really very surreal. And I remember just to my left, 3 firemen making the sign of the cross, taking their hands and kneeling. And I'm like, wow, this could be it. I mean, it happened really, really fast. And there was a woman, a blonde woman with bangs, and she had tears, they were like icicles. And she just kind of like, just to the, I guess, I don't know, I guess to the right of the fireman, she kind of just kneels down. And I'm like, oh, wow. And it really is kind of it wasn't numbing. It was like, well, this is it. You know, it really kind of felt like, well, there wasn't like crazy scary. It was like, this may well be it. But I don't know how, maybe 10, 15 seconds later, we realized it wasn't it. And we turned around, we were running. And my driver, Keith, he hands me the keys. He goes, the keys. You know, I just took the keys and threw them. I said, I don't care about the car. It's not my car. I don't really care about it. And we go up. This is kind of another surreal thing, and a couple of things happened there. But about a block north, about 8 officers that were attached to our unit, but they were another unit. There were 8 people attached to our unit, and they jump into a van. And I realized that the van is not a safe place for them. And I bang on the window, and the officer who's in the second seat from the rear kind of like turns and looks at me, and then turns down as if to say, sorry, we're saving ourselves. And I said, wow, this is pretty crazy. And I took a rock and I smashed the back window and said, get out. This isn't about me. This is about you. And so I get it. She figured, all's fair. It's pretty, again, it's really kind of surreal, some of the things that happen. And then I get past there, and there's plainclothes, what I find out to be a police officer, shooting out a window in a building, emptying just to dive into the window. So he just dives into the window, and what are you doing? We're running this way. We're going this way, and we just go. The idea was, hey, the West Side Highway is clear. Let's just run up the highway. And then we came across about 2 blocks north. Came across about 100 desperate parents who were parents of kids in Stuyvesant High School. But this was the only good news we had. We knew that Stuyvesant High School had been evacuated like a half an hour before that, and they were all up at the Intrepid. And we're like, hey, we got good news for you. Your kids are at the Intrepid, and they're all okay. And they just can't, but please stay on that side of the street. You can't tell 50 desperate parents. They just went through the barriers and let them go. they're going north. So there was some good news in that. And they weren't. If we didn't tell them that, I think they would have went the other way. So there was some good news there. Then we form up and are told to stay our position, and we're going to go back in. And it happened that mayoral candidate Mike Bloomberg had an office there, and he invites us all in for like coffee. And he goes, hey, whatever I got a whole cafeteria here, eat whatever you want, water. And we were getting kind of water bath, eye bath and stuff. And believe it or not, you get kind of hungry. And people were kind of, having a little snack. And I said, listen, just everybody stay together. We're probably going back in. And we did. We went, we weren't sure how safe it was. So my unit was told 1 and 8 here and there to go to the perimeter and to just, help any survivors. And so maybe 15, 20 minutes later, we do just that. And you get stragglers. And we were told, hey, if you can walk, we need you to walk. One of the things, and we did when we got close to the pit, I had to tell the officers is, listen, if we come across somebody and they're dead, we're not carrying them out of there. We're going for that says just be ready for that. That's a pretty hard thing to do. So we saw a number of body parts and what you could figure out to be remains of people. So that was pretty, I felt like in that sense, it was almost like in a war movie where somebody says, hey, it really was like battlefield condition. And then we start hearing jets going over us. And now, I don't know, so somewhere along the lines, we get told that the Pentagon has been hit. So we have a news blackout. So and there's the things with the Capitol. So we're kind of getting that, sporadically. I'm like, oh my God. It's all my military background. I'm like, the Pentagon said, and there's jets flying over me. How bad is this? So that was my initial part of the day. And so we went on for about 5 or 6 hours, really searching for parts, looking for survivors, and certainly finding remains and helping whoever we could. And we would find people huddled up in stores. And so, listen, it's clear now. You need to get out of here. You need to keep going north and everybody, everybody helped each other. You saw the strong people helping the weaker people, carrying people. And then we came across this Burger King that was converted into like a medic station. And I remember, people being carried in and being placed on top of tables in Burger King and getting eye baths. So really, the people came in and their eyes were like covered in that. And I never even heard of an eye bath before. You tip the body and you just let the water flow. And I ended up getting one a little bit there. I saw like 100 people getting that. And then you saw, and this was kind of like a cop thing, whatever. You saw cops and firemen like huddled and like taking a nap. This is like 2 or 3 hours after. And I'm like, we can't do that. And the doctor says they have to. They're exhausted. They're physically exhausted. Let them sleep for a half an hour. And it was just something you never really saw. Like it would be like, you get in trouble for doing that. And here's like the police doctor and the fire doctor saying, no, those guys look at them. They're exhausted. And there's exhausted, and there's like I understand there's a medical exhausted. You're really not like, oh, I'm just really tired. I'm exhausted. I had a rough day. No, like these people need to rest. So then there was really no place to bring them at the time. We wanted to keep the hospitals clear, and we passed by I think 3 hospitals in the course of the day, and nurses would be banging on the windows of the van, or where are the and I'm like, there isn't any. I've got the pile. It's only 2 blocks south of here. It's flat. And there was a few on the very, very end. And I think, I had this idea that, maybe 5, 6 hours later that they were all lost. And then, the doctors were telling us, people can survive for like 5 days. we have like 5 days where this really is a rescue. I wasn't optimistic. I thought, if they're telling us they have 5 days, then we're going to dig. And then you really saw, they call the bucket brigades just evolve, just emerge. I'm like, what are we doing? And it's literally you just work a pile. They call a term like the search and rescue, avoid anything that looks like there might be a hole or a gap, and it actually is possible. And we did find them later on, even a couple of stories down, where even in that big pile, there's gaps, like maybe the size of a room, it would be possible for. So for 5 days, that's what you really saw. You saw bucket brigades on the peripheral throughout the thing. And meanwhile, they're fighting fires. There's still this fire blazing, and I think there's actually fires there for a month or so. So they're fighting fires, and you're getting that really big smoke and residue, and you get really dirty. You get like thick mud on your sand and mud on your face from being close to that for a while. So we're down there for about 8 hours before we get called out. My unit is, okay, you're there long enough. We're going to send somebody else in place of you. And we get back to a staging location, again, really where the Bloomberg place was. As a matter of fact, my captain and I were invited to the inauguration by Bloomberg. He asked for our name, so it was, and he said, I remember you. And I said, yeah, I should fed my guys. And he goes, oh, you cops like to eat. Again, there was certainly a piece of, he really wasn't that well known that 9/11 may have actually helped him become mayor. So that was really, there's a whole lot more other stories but that's most of my day.
How well did the chain of command function that day? Was your team taking orders from up the chain, coming from an emergency operations center, or were you just deciding amongst yourselves where you could move, where you could be helpful?
So I got my orders from my captain, and we were really just the peripheral, I guess the northern perimeter. So don't go too deep in unless something happens. But those are our orders, and that's what we did. We did get drawn into the 7 World Trade Center collapse, and I let my captain know that another captain ordered us to secure that, and that ended up being not that really that big a deal. So my unit itself, I give the Queensborough chief, this was our area. We listen, 5 blocks away is not us. We're going to take care of this. And I know there was some, ad hoc operations, but we had a dedicated mission, and we did mostly that.
Okay. So you said you were there the first day for about 8 hours. When was the first time you were able to touch base with your wife and family and let them know where you were and that you were okay?
Probably about 8 p.m. that night. On the way into work, I called my mother-in-law and I told her, listen, I'm not coming home, pick up my kids and call my sister. I actually called my sister's school, aviation. I was yelling to some secretary, I'm going in, I can't get there. So I didn't speak to my wife until late, maybe 8, 9 o'clock that night.
Wow. And what's that conversation like? What was her mindset when you spoke?
I don't really remember much other than saying I'm okay. And my sister Tara was an NYPD officer, and she's in the 111. I got a hold of her. She's okay. And then I said, there's a lot of people we know that I'm very worried about, and there were. So that was, I'm a cop for 13 years. I've got 200 friends out there, and I know. I'm not feeling too good about what's going to happen in the next week or so.
Yeah. In your essay, you talk about someone saying, my brother's a firefighter and he's in there. And initially you're like thinking your brother's gone, but you find the brother. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
That was the good news of the day. Really, it was like really like a movie. It was like surreal. The fire lieutenant's name is Angelo Carbone, and his brother's name I forget now, but I met him that day, and he said, my brother's down there, his unit's down there, and I'm like, they're right. The odds are really against us. So imagine, and I am looking if I can find him. That'd be great. That wasn't my main mission. And imagine somebody about 6 feet in front of you, and there's a lot of smoke between you. He's got a fire jacket, and he has their names are really big. They're like this big. They're like 6-8 inches. And it's the name Carbone. I'm like, well, it's the same name. It could be. And I said, hey, you know Angelo Carbone? And he grabs me. I think he thought it was his brother that was hurt. And I'm like, yeah, your brother, Angelo. He goes, my brother, he's a lieutenant, Queens North Task Force. And I'm like, yes, I know. He'd like to speak to you. And I remember clearing the radio. It says, priority message for Queens North Task Force Lieutenant. And, to the two of them, hey, Ange, how you doing? I'm okay, we're good. A couple of typical brother stuff. And I got to take the radio back. Angelo, he's good, you're good, we got work to do. And it was funny, his story about him was he was the admin lieutenant, and he was in charge of all the administrative stuff in the building. I walk into his office 3-4 months later. He's not there. And his driver, his regular driver, and he's also an admin guy, he's in the office. And I asked for something. And I says, can I have such and such? Sorry, Lou, we can't do that for you. Because wait a minute. You're the guy that found Carbone's brother. Well, Carbone said, if you ever come in here and you need anything, the answer is yes. So the answer was no, and now it's yes. And whatever, I got something I wasn't supposed to get, but because of that. So Angelo did return the favor. I remember that well. Yeah, there was some happy things, some good stories.
Yeah, what a feel-good story in the midst of all that tragedy. You talk in your essay too about some people kind of seeming oblivious to what was going on, spectators. Can you expand on that a little?
Oh, there was some real, just like, there was like some of these surreal things. This guy had an ice cream stand and he had toasted almonds, and he's well, it's all going to go. And there's like 50 people standing around eating toasted almond ice cream. That's kind of like funny. You see it now, you're like, this is kind of like almost, it's like comical. Like, well, why not? It's going to melt. But this couple comes out of an apartment building, and they're young, and they have a baby, and the baby wasn't a year old. And he's wearing a blue baseball cap that says NYPD. He comes out with a stroller down the thing. So where are you going? Oh, we want to see what's going on. And I'm like, you see the smoke between you and I? This isn't good for you and I. And you got to go back. And he says, no, I'm not going back. He says, give me your wallet, give me a driver's license. I said, here's your two choices. Go to the first precinct and surrender yourself, or I'm going to keep your ID. All right? So you need to go back in there, and the wife kind of convinces him in. And then in the same building, there's a maintenance worker with a fire hose hosing down the front of the building because it's the soot. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not a fireman, but I'm pretty sure the water pressure is really, really important. And maybe you should stop it. No, I'm not going to do it. So I have like 10 guys kind of stand on the hose, and we cut the hose. So now you can't wash it. And we left. And it was just, you get like, like real, like you talk about the idea of bounded rationality. This guy really thought it was that. His boss told him to clean this down in the middle of this. He thinks it's, important to hose that down. And there was like, kind of like we call like disaster tourists, and you really don't have time to deal with them. And they know that. You're like, listen, you really need you to leave. And what are you going to do? I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to arrest you. I got, people's lives to save. Maybe there was even down by, somehow we got near the Staten Island ferry. We came around, and there were something that not spoke about much. There was a lot of, there was like a flotilla, like a Dunkirk like flotilla that evacuated the lower end of the island. And it sounds great. And the vast majority of people that were doing it were great. Life saved lives, made things happy for everybody. But there were some people who decided, they put these signs by these tugs. Hey, the union is not, authorizing this. And I just took it down, and I just ripped it up in front of the guy. And he says, there's no unions today. And he goes, really? I'm like, really? There's no unions today. And I walked away. And no, I'm fine with that. You make complain to wherever you want. I'm fine. I think I'm going to be okay. But there were just people who just didn't grasp what was happening, or got petty about something. Like, no, but I mean, I don't want to pick out say these are the vast majority of people did anything for you. It was, you could, you were like, everybody, 99% of the people helped 99% of the people. The amount of, love and help and desperation that you saw that day was just profoundly. But these little things kind of like stood out. Like some people just, I don't know, clueless. It's pretty bad. But I guess maybe some people are just really selfish. In policing, you see the best and worst in society all the time. So you really, I had 13 years on. I wasn't that young, and was kind of used to like just extremes. But I saw, again, you saw the best in most people and the worst in a few odd people.
Do you recall seeing any looting?
No, nothing. No, I think people would give stuff away. There wasn't, nothing along any along that.
So 9/12 dawns. Do you go back to work because New York still needs to be protected, still needs to be secured? That work kind of has to continue. Or do you report to Ground Zero for recovery operations? Because I know at some point you are involved in that.
So I go, so I think I got off at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was supposed to be back at 4, but I went back at 12. I couldn't help it. I remember I went to, for some reason, I just, I don't know, there's no emergency days. I went to the ATM, I got $200, and bought like 3 gallons of milk and some bread. And my wife was a school teacher. She was off that day. Here's milk and bread, and here's $200, and I don't want to see you again. And I went back and the cap, I was supposed to be in a 4 in the captain's group. We got to do all this planning. So we went from like having 3 squads, 8 to 4, 4 to 12 to midnight, to 2 squads, everybody doing 12 hours. And the lieutenant was part of the logistics for that and what we were going to be doing citywide. But that was, that was only maybe 6, 7 hours after getting off the night before.
Okay. And did you stay at Ground Zero for weeks or?
For about 30 days. So for 30 days, everybody worked every day, and it was supposed to be a 12-hour day, but most days were about 16 hours. So for about 30 days, that was all we did. We did Ground Zero. We were part of either on the pilot. You would pull people. You wouldn't be on the thing for more than like 3 or 4 hours. They would pull you out, and you would do perimeter security. So we did that for about 30 days, and then after that, you worked every day. And then after that, they said then everybody's getting sick and they're breaking down. Everybody has to be off 1 day a week. Yeah. And it was, that was kind of like funny, is how people would be like, so what'd you do on your day off? I didn't do anything. Slept. That was it. And the other kind of funny thing was, you went to work, you were there for 14 hours, everybody was feeding you. The guys gained weight. And you'd go home and your wife or your spouse would I want to make you a nice dinner. Please don't feed me. I can't eat anymore. So New York, the restaurants just took care of us. It was amazing. We just we ate well, to be quite honest. Not long after. So, but that, and we were working, 12, 14, 16-hour days. And the first week, after that 5 days, they said, okay, everybody's gone. And then you started getting, the call, the death reports. And obviously, everybody knows a lot of people. So we had, I don't write the numbers wrong, the Rescue 4, they, in June of that year, called the Father's Day disaster. I believe 4 firemen died, 2 more almost died, and 2 114 officers almost died. They lost, I hope I have the number right, 4 on Father's Day. That same firehouse lost 11 on 9/11. So they had, I believe, I hate to have the numbers wrong. I think they, between 9/11 and the Father's Day disaster, which is 2 months before that, they lost like 15 officers. And there was like a firehouse of like 40. And it was one of our firehouses. So we knew some of the guys there. And I remember Congressman Crowley was there, the community came out for him. And I just was like, just really overtaken by it. A very good friend of mine who was a cop, his father was a retired fireman, had lost like 10 of his friends. He says, how you doing? He goes, I'm fine. My father has gotten out of the chair in the living room in 3 days. He's just frozen. He lost like 20 of his friends. And some of the reports weren't even finalized. It took you like maybe a week or 2 to get the final accounting of it. And that was, some people more than others. But the 23 fire officers, NYPD officers, I knew 10 of them like very well. I had seen 2 of them the night before. And there's 343 firemen, may not be well known outside the city, but about 25% of the fire department are former cops. So that, because their time counts. So there were 3 firemen who were former cops with me that I knew had passed. So then it became like it was wherever you went, you could be in your parish. I'm part of Our Lady of Blessed Sacrament. The parish lost 18 people. My high school lost 18 people. My son's high school lost 18. My kid's soccer coach was there. It was so anywhere, all your groups, everybody had, was just, it was like, you didn't want to go to soccer practice 2 weeks later, drop your kid off. You're like, I'm going to get more bad news. And you did. And you knew it. So it was like, it was really, in my group, there was like really no escape group of people that weren't affected by it. So it was pretty overwhelming.
I can imagine. Speaking of it being overwhelming, did they bring in counseling services, chaplain services for those who were working recovery operations?
Yeah, we did mass at Ground Zero. That was not uncommon. You would, you saw cops and firemen and other rescue workers praying when that cross went up. There were a couple of people you just saw people going down and saying a prayer. And I was there when they raised the flag, the one that was the iconic one. And I remember saying, that's going to be a big deal. That's like Iwo Jima. It's going to be a really big deal. And that was like, people started singing God Bless America. So I saw a lot of, prayers. And my unit got invited, it's like a week or two later, we got invited to come into St. Andrew's Church. My sister was parishioner there. And we came in like 10 minutes late and mass. And there was a big service, like 1,000 people give us a standing ovation. And about 10 minutes later, we had to leave. And I just said, I'm sorry, we have to leave. And we love you and we love you back. And so there was, that was kind of like that happening. That was kind of common. So there was a lot of praying. People who don't normally pray, but the atheists, no atheists in the foxholes. Well, I saw that day and that week, there was a lot of just praying.
You mentioned when you initially mustered up to head to Ground Zero that you had some PPE that wasn't OSHA, certified, and you had to run to Sears. Did the PPE situation at Ground Zero get better as the days went on and you were working on recovery operations?
No, really, I really do take to task the EPA. Former Governor Whitman was the director, and the EPA's IG had since come out with a report like, she really, gave this blanket clearing. And myself, I really take task with both the NYPD and the FDNY, and a little more FDNY on this, and not because I love them, is they deal with respiratory issues more so. And I was hazmat tech at the time with my Coast Guard background. But, they should have known that really, the first 5 days, you're doing a rescue, all bets are off. We'll do what we have to do. Really, after that, it really should have been a hazmat site. We shouldn't have been given this blanket. Go in there and, do this. And a recovery is one of the highest marks of the civilization is how you treat the dead. And we did that at Ground Zero, and we did that at the dump in Staten Island. They used the dump for as a means to truck the dirt out, and then go with DNA sampling, going looking for body parts, and it was it was having me at the same place, but there really wasn't the respiratory protection that really I think is an indictment of the city of New York, the EPA, and I would say the NYPD, the FDNY really should, the next one, the next kind of thing like that, there's got to be that thing. So I think the respiratory stuff, I've got a problem with my lungs. So there's, in addition to the 343 firemen and 23 New York City police officers and 37 Port Authority officers, like twice that number has died from 9/11 related cancer. I've got a sister, NYPD sergeant, who actually taught at Monmouth for a short time, who is a breast cancer survivor. It's 9/11 related. I've got skin cancer from 9/11. I've got some issues with my lungs. They're trying to figure out what it is. So I think, that some of that could have been prevented. And in that sense, I think there was not good leadership, certainly from the EPA, but I think from the NYPD and the FDNY and Port Authority. Really, our health officials really should have. They sold us a bad set of goods that, hey, that was a safe environment. It was not a safe environment.
One of the things I wanted to make clear in the exhibit was that we lost, this great number of people on 9/11, and people talk about that as they should, but there are these long-term ramifications for many, many more. Do you think we as a nation are doing enough to support those of you who have 9/11 related illnesses?
There is a fairly good, not World Trade Center compensation program that I'm part of. So I go for an annual checkup, and my skin cancer and other treatment. There is care for it, no out-of-pocket expenses to me. I know they're actually still working on identifying other things. I think cervical cancer is it's not presumptive. The idea, if you get certain cancers, if I get certain cancer, people, 9/11 first responders, it's presumptive that 9/11 was the cause of it. So far, it's fair. I think there's a good faith effort. Congress did come through. They need to continue to do that. And it had to, a lot of it had to do with John Stewart, who was really a major advocate for us. And about 4 years ago, I bumped into him at Chase Stadium, City Field now. He says, "Hey, how you doing? I'm retiring with big guy. I love you." And he goes, "I love you, guy." He gives me this big hug, and my friend's like, "How'd you just do that?" I'm like, "John Stewart, I'm like PD. I feel white. We love each other. It's a love fest." He's a really great, really great advocate for us, and very much appreciate him.
Did 9/11 change policing?
Oh, I think it did. We took on, policing is big. You got almost 18,000 police departments and 800,000 police officers. So I think it changed municipal policing, places like New York, Boston, Chicago, and LA. But there's a quote from a police chief. He says, I had 10 homicides in my jurisdiction last year, and Bin Laden didn't kill one of them. So I think the bigger cities will see the counterterrorism role as being a bigger part. Like I said earlier, that I saw CompStat change policing. I saw 9/11 change policing in New York City. We went from having 125. We went from having 16 guys in the Joint Terrorism Task Force to having 150 or 250 guys in counterterrorism. We've got NYPD has 15 officers stationed internationally. Whether it's Rome, Paris, Mumbai, really seeing how terrorism globally impacts local policing. So you'll see a bigger piece of that in the bigger cities, less so in the smaller cities.
Do you feel that 9/11 changed you personally in any ways?
Oh yeah, no, I think if 9/11 hadn't happened, I would be a high school teacher in Holy Cross High School, it's like Queens right now. Not long, so right after 9/11, I'm sorry, actually, a year later, I get activated. So my unit gets activated on active duty for about a year with the Coast Guard, and I get stationed in New York, and we would intervene or intercept vessels coming in international waters, and they got transferred to Intel for a year. So I deal with 9/11 for like a year in NYPD. Then I'm on active duty for a year. I take a leave of absence in NYPD, and I come back, and then I'm asked to go out to Monterey, California, for the Center for Homeland Defense and Security's master's program in Homeland Security. But you're like Mr. Homeland Security. You're doing NYPD counterterrorism. You're doing the Coast Guard stuff. So I go out there for 18 months. You go out there for every 8 weeks for 2 weeks, and you finish the master's program. I remember I just finished a master's in education, and I was going to be a high school teacher upon retirement. While I'm there, I get recruited by Pace University to help them start their Homeland Security program. So I did that while I was on the job, and then I go to Hurricane Katrina. I go to Deepwater Horizon. A couple of things happened. I was part of the U.S. Open event management team, and that in Shea Stadium really ramped up with counterterrorism after 9/11. Then I decided to retire, and while I'm my last year or two, I'm teaching at 3 places. I'm teaching at Pace and LaGuardia Community College. I'm teaching the new TSA people. And then one of the guys from California asked me to teach a class at Monmouth. So now, I'm teaching Intel at Pace. I can teach the same class there. I retire, and I'm doing some part-time work for the Coast Guard. And I get told by now gone, Professor Corum, the then chair of the Criminal Justice Department. Hey, listen, there's a position coming up next year. You should really think about applying for it. And I kind of had mixed feelings whether I wanted to do this full time or not. And I said, you know what? If I get it, I'll give it a year and see how it goes. So Greg Corum wasn't always he's a little bit of a trickster. I think he had other plans for me. I said, so anyway, I'm not even here. I'm at Monmouth for a year. I just retired from the NYPD. I retired in October, and then the following September, 10 months, I'm at Monmouth full time. And I remember walking across campus and somebody yells, "Hey, Professor Comiskey." I turned, who's he talking to me? He's talking to me. Wow. And I ended up starting to like it, but I wasn't even here a year. And Dr. Corum says, listen, there's a tenure track position opening up our department. It's geared for Homeland Security. Only thing is, you got to get a doctorate. I'm like, oh, wow, I know a lot about that. It's a whole big to do. And let me think about it. And one of my colleagues at Pace University was going for a doctoral program at St. John's Bishop. Listen, they got a 3-year program. So I applied for that program. I applied to John Jay, and I got a scholarship to John Jay, but it's like a 5-year program, 5.5-year program. And that wasn't even built in with your dissertation, which this could be 7 years. They have a 3-year program. And it was an EDD, not a PhD. And I'm like, so I talked to Greg Corum and the dean. I'm like, listen, if I do this 3-year program and get through it, will you accept that? He said, yeah, that you'll because I was connected to the Naval Postgraduate School, that would meet the criteria. So I had to be a doctoral candidate. I had to be accepted at a program and be a candidate there. So I did it. And I applied for the program. And then Pace had to talk about offering me a job, and that ended up not working out. So I stayed at Monmouth, and I got the tenure track position and got tenure 2 years ago. So it did work out. But that was not planned. I thought I was going to take an Intel analyst position with the Coast Guard. So that wasn't. I did. You know what? I liked the students at Monmouth, and I liked teaching, and I taught a little bit in high school. I'd been an adjunct. And I found that I really did like it. And Monmouth really did surprise me. I knew very little about Monmouth. I knew about Monmouth Racetrack. I'd been in Fort Monmouth a couple of times, but didn't know a whole lot about Monmouth. Ended up I really fell in love with Monmouth University.
It is 4 o'clock, and I told you we'd go about an hour. Do you have time for a couple more questions? Or
go ahead, shoot.
Okay. Something I've been asking everybody is, do you remember an intense patriotism in the aftermath of 9/11?
Oh, it was huge. I had in my essay, a little part of it is I was at Game 6 in '86 in the World Series, the Buckner game, and that was crazy. We sort of lost and we ended up winning. Probably, after my family stuff, it's one of the biggest days of my life. But about 2 weeks after 9/11, the first Met home game, and it was almost sold out. And they invited any of the first responders that were there to come onto the field. And it was probably about 100 of us. My captain goes, "Yeah, you're on. We're going. We were there." And that stadium rocked more than they did in the '80s. I thought that they was going to fall down. But I remember, we would park, if even ground zero, we'd park about 3 blocks north of there, and we kind of walk in teams of 8. People were high-fiving you, love you, God bless America. The patriotism was, it was people. I remember people just in the crowd singing God bless America like almost nightly. I never, never saw that level of patriotism.
Kind of the flip side of that is, do you remember any anti-Muslim or anti-immigrant backlash?
I saw a little, couple of incidents in Astoria where there were some incidents at some, not the mosque, I think the hookah bars. There was a little Muslim area there, and there was some words exchanged. Just a little bit I saw there. And then I guess part of that, they were going to build the mosque. They did build it by the, and credit to Mike Bloomberg. Like, listen, build the mosque. This is what we're about. This is America. And I was actually a little saddened that, some of the things that were said at that demonstration against the building of the mosque. That's America. That's what we get to do. So that, I didn't see a lot of it, just a little.
Yeah. And how did you feel about the global war on terror that followed 9/11?
Yeah, so, today's the day Colin Powell passed today, and I'm a big fan of his, read his book. And so I teach the WMD problem, and he was the guy that went to the UN and sold it. The bill of goods he sold, I was privy to, and I believed it. And, there's the intel failure of global war on terror was really, when it first happened, I got activated for it, and I was very much in support of it. I give him, a real big fan of his. He didn't speak out much after. He resented the bad intel that was given there, and it was pretty, what we know now about the intel, there were 86 databytes, and but the problem was 81 of the 86 databytes were the same guy named Curveball, who in the end says, yeah, I made it up. And I made it up because I knew that you would invade based on that information. And I think, and then there's actually, there was intelligence reform that says, hey, you have to tell us that the 81 of the 86 databytes are from the same person. And I really simplified a whole 400-page commission that I teach. So, day one of the global war, I looked at it, and my analogy was Munich, that 1939. And, lost thousands of people in the war there for a war that, then, by the way, Saddam Hussein, super bad guy. And, he was kind of interesting what he said. Here's the one piece of the intel that was accurate. Saddam Hussein was aspirational. He was trying to acquire weapons of mass destruction. He just didn't have the capability. So there's two things, intentions and capabilities. He had every intention and would have done it. His own generals were lying to him and telling him they were working on it and they were close to it. And if you didn't say that, you were killed. He was a pretty bad despot. And then why did you do it? He goes, I wasn't bluffing you. I was bluffing Iran, which should have been really part of it. That is believable. So, but much to his discredit, and he gets the bulk of the blame, is he thought we wouldn't call his bluff. Surprise, surprise, we didn't. And then we had that, global war on terrorism that, and maybe history would be kind us, and maybe it was better that we did do it. Having said that, I wouldn't wage a war based on intel like that.
Yeah. And last question, are we safer today than we were on 9/10/2001?
Well, game theory tells us that both sides, the terrorists and government, game each other and based, that's your act is our counteract, and we're going to be ahead of you, and it'll be continual. I think that on a physical security, airline security, public space security, yes, see something, say something has been some benefits. That the threat landscape is cyber now. That's our next. You hear Panetta talk about a cyber Pearl Harbor. I do think, generally speaking, it's a relative term. But are we safer now? I think yes, we are. How do you? The problem with crime and terrorism, counterterrorism, how do you measure a negative? Did nothing happen because we did something, or would nothing have happened anyway? So then I teach that as a piece there. I think that we try to. It's always that liberty security pendulum that we try to balance in a democratic government, which and we're living that today with the January 6th events. How do we balance that sense of liberty and security, and that's ongoing. And to our credit, we grapple with that. That should be like I tell my students, you should have some cognitive angst. It should hurt a little bit to think about this and all of the implications. And there's no simple answers. There's the wicked problem. Short answer, I'd like to think that we are a little safer than we were from terrorism 9/11.
All right. Well, John, Dr. Comiskey had an incredibly important perspective here. Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't covered?
I think America is a great country, and we have our problems, and we need to get through together. A dash of the spirit of 9/11 would go a whole long way in 2021.
All right. Those are words to end by. I'll stop the recording.